I found myself getting into a debate at work today about who Wladimir Klitschko should fight next. As you'll know, Wladimir Klitschko recently is coming off a win against Alexander Povetkin. As it stands, is the WBA, WBO and IBF champion, with obviously his brother Vitaly still as the WBC strap holder. Klitschko won the fight against Povetkin, I think 119-104 across all the judges' cards. I think they pretty much gave him every single round. There was one round where Klitschko was Dr. Point. It's a particularly boring fight and a particularly boring style of fight, lots of clinching and that sort of thing, which I won't go into because it's been covered enough online in the last month or so. But I'm now starting to think, now we've had a few weeks to get over that fight, who is the next sensible opponent for Wladimir Klitschko? And I've sort of had a look at the heavyweight rankings, had a look at who's got the potential, not only who deserves a shot, but who's got a potential to make a fight that would be interesting and would involve a lot of public demand. I mean, the first thing to mention is obviously there are mandatory obligations at stake. I believe there are two particular governing bodies who have number one contenders that are working their way into a mandatory position. Unfortunately, I don't believe that either one of those would lead to a particularly interesting matchup that would lead to great public excitement. And I believe the two fighters in question are Kubrat Pulev, who defeated Tony Thompson recently in a final eliminator. I think that was for the IBF number one contendership. Obviously, Kubrat Pulev unbeaten, decent knockout record. He's quite highly touted, great amateur pedigree. His form over Tony Thompson is interesting. For me, it's not a fight that really gets the juices flowing. I mean, Kubrat Pulev's got some decent form, but being honest with you, he looked in trouble against Thompson in the first couple of rounds. He looked outsmarted and outboxed, and I thought Thompson was really getting the better of him. Unfortunately for Thompson, his age and began to take toll, and towards the end of the fight he tired and wasn't the same fighter he was at the start, and Pulev sort of worked him out and wore him down a bit, but Pulev didn't look like any sort of world beater in that fight, and I certainly think that against Wladimir Klitschko, he'd probably put up a similar performance to Povetkin, and probably find himself dominated and losing every round. So that's one that I wouldn't overly like to see, although I do obviously understand the need for Wladimir to keep up with his mandatory obligations, and if that means he has to fight Pulev, then that's obviously going to be a route he has to go down. The other one, and I believe this may be on the WBO side, but I might be wrong on that, is Denis Boistov, another sort of undefeated heavyweight. He was known as the White Mike Tyson, I believe. Very, very highly touted heavyweight a few years ago. To be honest, he's one who's completely dropped off the face of the planet in terms of fighting recognisable opposition, and his momentum seems to come to a halt. I mean, I think his name is it's at an all-time low in boxing circles. He's not highly ranked on BoxRec, or he's not in most people's heavyweight rankings. He's been in the press. I think he was scheduled to fight Tyson Fury about 18 months ago. That fight never happened. I believe he was also scheduled to fight Derek Chisora, and for whatever reason that fight never went ahead either. So he's had an opportunity to be in with two big name opponents. He could put him into the limelight, and whether that's the opponent's fault or his fault, neither of those have happened. But I really think he needs to go in against some top tier level opposition before getting a shot. And once again, I do understand he's worked his way into the mandatory position. So if it is that Boistov and Pulev have to be the next two fights, then that's unfortunate, because I don't believe either of them will generate any public enthusiasm, and I don't believe either of them pose any sort of threat to Klitschko. Nevertheless, thought it was worth touching on those two, as with them being in the mandatory positions, it's difficult, and obviously Wladimir will have to be looking at filling his obligations to keep hold of his straps on that side. So I've done a list of who I consider to be the top heavyweights out there, and I won't look at them in order, because I do appreciate that it's very contentious, and at some point I'll probably do another video trying to outline sort of how I've got the heavyweights ranked and in what order. But I jotted down the names of the top heavyweights, and I've had a look. A lot of them have obviously been in with either Wladimir or Vitaly before. So for a start, you've got Tony Thompson. I know, obviously, he's someone who's known as a bit of a journeyman, but he's a pretty classy fighter. He gave Pulev a lot of trouble, and obviously 2 defeats over David Price. I've ruled Thompson out. Obviously, he's been beaten twice by Klitschko. I don't think there'd be reason to give him a third shot. He's getting on a bit, and obviously he's lost to Kubrat Pulev. So Pulev obviously has stronger claims than Tony Thompson. Another one who's very popular in America, Mexico, Chris Arreola, coming off a really, really decent win against Seth Mitchell, scoring an early knockout. Areola's a big name. He's been in with one of the Klitschkos before, as we know, was soundly beaten. He's facing a similar problem in that his last fight was a loss to Bermain Stavern. So the difficulty is, how would you give Areola the fight if you're not giving it to Stavern? So I understand Stavern is currently the WBC mandatory for Vitaly's belt, and will either be a mandatory challenger to Vitaly, or go on to be gifted the belt, or maybe have to fight in a championship match after Vitaly retires. So I'm thinking at the moment it won't be Areola, because you can't give it to Areola and not to Stavern, and it probably won't be Stavern because Stavern is waiting to go down the WBC route. But if you look at the other sort of top-rated heavyweights out there, you've got the likes of Robert Helenius, Wladimir Solis, Derek Chisora. These are a few names I should add who I don't think should be given a shot at this stage. So Solis, obviously, he's fought Vitaly, a very, very early stoppage. There was some question over, I believe, a knee injury during that fight. He's looked decent, but he lacks the sort of star power to get a second shot at this early stage. Really need to be going in and beating up some decent level opposition. Helenius, very, very dubious claims, like he's been inactive for a long period of time following an injury in the Del Boy Chisora fight. He looked like he found his level against Chisora, to be honest, and I don't see there being too much demand to fight Helenius. Nevertheless, I mention him because he's still very highly ranked. The other one, Derek Chisora, he's obviously working himself into a really good position, European title holder, decent wins over Gerber, decent wins over Malik Scott. I think the difficulty with Chisora is he needs to beat some top-level opposition before he goes in against Klitschko, because so far every time he's fought against top-level opposition, he's been beaten, and I include the likes of Fury, obviously Helenius, which was a contentious one, Vitaly, and also David Haye. Now, I did a video yesterday on Chisora's new style and how far I think he can go, and I think he could possibly work his way back into that, but I'd like to see him going against some named opposition before being thrown back into the Klitschko mix. So that's enough about who he shouldn't be fighting. Now looking at a few options as to who he should be fighting, I think it comes down to effectively 2 people, and this is 2 people who, the fight makes sense in terms of it being commercially viable, and also the fight makes sense in terms of the fighters deserving it, or the public wanting to see it, and that side of thing. Now, the obvious one is the winner of the David Haye versus Tyson Fury fight. I know that one's been delayed and is kicking off in February. Maybe if Wladimir has to take a mandatory, maybe he goes in against Kubrat Pulev in February, fights at the same time as these two, and then goes in against the winner sort of 4 months, 5 months after that. I think the winner of Haye v Fury has genuine claims at being given a shot against Wladimir for this one. I know Haye's gone in before and was soundly beaten, but Haye's wins over Chisora, Valuev, John Ruiz, impressive. If he goes on to beat Tyson Fury, I think that puts him right to the top of the list. If you look at Fury's form recently, and I know people have a lot of questions over Fury, but Fury's beaten Kevin Johnson. That was his best performance, in my opinion, the way he beat Kevin Johnson. Kevin Johnson obviously went on, he got his shot against Klitschko's, and Fury beat him, pretty much won every round of that fight. Fury beat Derek Chisora in in my decision, my idea, a clear victory. Now I know Chisora came in out of shape, and it was the old Chisora, if you like, but nevertheless that's pretty good form. Fury beating Chisora, given Chisora's recent rise and him beating Scott Gerber, him being the European champion. Fury beating Steve Cunningham, I know Cunningham's a sort of cruiserweight. He gets a bit of stick on that side. But in my opinion, Cunningham beat Thomas Adamek, who's another highly touted heavyweight. And if Fury can beat and knock out Steve Cunningham when Adamek couldn't, then I'm reading that as good form. So I think Fury's got good claims. I can understand why people don't like him. But his wins over Cunningham, Johnson, Chisora, real strong level of form in my opinion. And obviously David Haye, he's also beaten Chisora, Valuev, many names I could mention there. So the two of them have really decent records, and I think going in against each other, the winner of that fight will probably have the strongest claims in terms of who they've beaten, in terms of getting that fight with Wladimir. Now I realise that if those two have a war in February, realistically we're looking at June, July earliest that they could square off against Wladimir. So that would perhaps give Wladimir an opportunity to fulfill one of his mandatory obligations and take on Pulev or take on Boistov if needs be, and then gear himself up to a real fight in the summer of next year and have it being an absolutely massive event. I mean, both of those two, whether it's Haye or Fury, would sell a fight very well. There'd be huge public interest, more interest from America if one of those two's involved. Press conferences would be very entertaining, I can imagine. So I think those two, or the winner of those two, is probably the most deserving in terms of Wladimir's next fight outside of the mandatory obligation. The only other name that I'd like to throw into the mix is Deontay Wilder. He's becoming more and more well known, higher and higher up the rankings and more respected. He's now, I think it's 30 fights, 30 knockouts, all early. I mean, obviously the problem with Deontay Wilder is the level of opposition he's been in against. He's fighting guys now in his 30th fight who Tyson Fury was taken out 2 years ago against Further. He's fighting guys like Audley Harrison. He got blown out by David Price in a round. Price then, soundly beaten by Tony Thompson. I mean, it's hard with Deontay Wilder because the level of opposition just isn't there. But in terms of what he does bring to the table, it's excitement. It's a name. It's a fan base. I'd like to see Wilder versus Klitschko, just because you never know what's going to happen. You never know if, you wouldn't really want to bet on that fight going beyond 2 or 3 rounds. I mean, Wilder looks like, he might not be able to take a punch. We certainly knows he probably throws the hardest punch in the division. So either way, that's going to be an exciting fight. He's a very entertaining figure, and it's going to create a lot of public interest. So I think, I'm going to take mandatory opposition out of the picture for 1 second. I think there's only 2 people Klitschko can fight in terms of the commercial viability, in terms of the public interest, and in terms of who would deserve this fight. And I think that's a June to July summer fight between the winner of Haye versus Fury or Deontay Wilder. And if it is to be Wilder, I'd like Wilder to fight 1 or 2 times against named opposition. Maybe if he goes on and fights a Chris Arreola or a Bermain Stavern or even a Seth Mitchell or a Jonathan Banks or a Tony Thompson, just fight an American heavyweight who's a bit decent, got a bit about him, and that will give Wilder's record a bit of respectability going into the fight. So I think that's when it's really going to get juicy, if it's one of those 3 guys, winner of Haye versus Fury or Deontay Wilder. I see everyone else as boring and hard to sell following the Povetkin fight, which has probably left the public with an all-time low interest in Wladimir. I'd be really interested to hear your thoughts, really interested in who you think Wladimir should fight next, who you'd like to see him fight next. Also, how realistic you think my picks are there, Haye, Fury or Wilder. Please leave your comments in the section below. I will respond to them all individually. Thanks very much.